Yonaso Manasakara by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. Prior to the day of the Buddha's enlightenment, the practice of the mantra meditation, and its derivative of an absorptive meditation were quite well known and very popular among Anchorat, however none of them had ever developed an insight for the enlightenment yet. This is because the traditional meditation can only force the mind into an absorption. Then the mind could be calm, and a practitioner may earn some sorts of meditation powers, but not an enlightenment. The mantra meditation, its derivative of absorptive meditation, try to maneuver the mind by force, pushing the mind to stay with the sacred word, but it can only temporarily suppress the troubling mind with meditation power. It can be compared like putting a stone onto grass, then the grass cannot grow up anymore and it may appear that no grass is growing. However, when taking the stone out from the ground, then the grass becomes alive and green again. This is because the mantra meditation cannot eliminate the root cause of the arising defilement, and as long as the root cause of problem is not fully eliminated, then once the stone is taken out, a new problem is growing within the mind again. On the contrary, in the Buddhist practice, a mindfulness is used to abandon an arising unwholesome mind one by one, like as a skilled lathe worker shaping clay potteries. In managing the mind, we may apply either a strong approach or a soft approach to handle the mind. Conventionally, we force the mind to become steadied before it will burst out into action, but the Buddha totally changed the conventional technique of mantra meditation by introducing a new technique based on the threefold study strategy by applying a mindfulness with careful attention in Yonaso Manasakara as a mindfulness meditation to purify the mind to become internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. In Buddhism, the greatest application of mindfulness is to have a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma, so-called the Yonaso Manasakara, on whatsoever is happening inside the mind, such as thinking whether it is wholesome or unwholesome, and then coping with it correctly. The Buddha explained that after being able to initiate a mindfulness from walking, body postures, and breathing, then by applying the mindfulness in Yonaso Manasakara to abandon any troubling mind, and then surprisingly the mind will become internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. Evidently, in addition to the conventional mantra meditation, the Buddha had discovered a new way of making a mind to become concentrated with mindfulness in Yonaso Manasakara as follows.
Just as a man walking fast might consider, "Why am I walking fast? What if I walk slowly?" And he would walk slowly. Then he might consider, "Why am I walking slowly? What if I stand? What if I sit?" And he would sit. Then he might consider, "Why am I sitting? What if I lie down?" And he would lie down. You are giving attention to some sign, and owing to that sign there arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hatred, and delusion. Then when he gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, any such evil, unwholesome thoughts are abandoned in him and subside, and with their abandoning his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. When he examines the danger in those thoughts and does not give attention to them, his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. When he gives attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. When with his teeth clenched and his tongue presses against the roof of his mouth, he beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind, any such evil, unwholesome thoughts are abandoned in him and subside, and with their abandoning, his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. This one is then called a master of the courses of thought. We will think whatever thought he wishes to think, and he will not think any thought that he does not wish to think. He has severed craving, flung off the fetters, and with the complete penetration of conceit he has made an end of suffering.
Yonaso Manasakara is a mindfulness application with careful attention on something of wholesome dharma to abandon an arising unwholesome mind, and then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is a way to incorporate a mindfulness into a meditation, so-called a mindfulness meditation. The Buddha emphasized on the importance of keeping the mind to be internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated, and whenever the mind was unwholesomeness, then we should apply mindfulness with careful attention yoniso manasikara to abandon the arising unwholesomeness as follows.
I teach you to abandon any kind of arising unwholesomeness within the mind, because the mind with unwholesomeness will be struggling, non-steadied internally, restless with desire and lust. This can be done by having mindfulness with careful attention on something wholesome, in order to abandon that unwholesomeness, so that the mind will become steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated in peace. This is the way to have the mind be wholesome.
Conceptually, Yoniso Manasikara is sort of a mindfulness surveillance routine monitoring a mind that safeguard a mind from any arising unwholesome problem by initiating a mindfulness first, saying checking the breathing if it is breathing in or breathing out, then having this mindfulness to monitor the condition of mind, and then if there is any unwholesome one which is most likely an unwholesome thought, then having the mindfulness with careful attention by applying a proper dharma to abandon the arising unwholesome one immediately. This execution routine consists of 3 parts. Firstly, a mindfulness must be initialized with consciousness. Secondly, having a mindfulness to realize whether the mind is wholesome or unwholesome. Thirdly, in case if the mind is unwholesome of which the mind is struggling, non-steadied internally, restless with desire and lust, then having a careful attention on dharma to abandon the unwholesome thought, so that the mind will become steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. This routine processing is executed very fast. Typically, just by having a mindfulness, the mindfulness will temporarily interrupt the thinking process and the mind can be reset to a normal condition. However, if the unwholesomeness is strong, then it will recur again within the mind processing. In this circumstance, a proper dharma must be appropriately selected and applied to the arising problem. That is, a general dharma such as the goodness of Buddha will be used in maintaining the mindfulness surveillance routine, and a specific dharma will be used to counter on a certain type of arising lower fetter along the courses of thought. It is evidently that a Buddhist practice is an instructed cognition on how to handle varieties of problems inside the mind. Although the mind originally may be pure, but as we all are living in such a hostile and dynamic environment that within just a flip of few seconds, the mind is dominated by a self. We all have experienced with so many things in life with the information of individuality of karma which turns the mind into greed, anger, hatred, and resentfulness. As a result, the mind is prone to be influenced by uninstructed cognition with ignorance. The mind will become wholesome or unwholesome depending on certain condition by the law of cause and effect in nature. And this is the reason why the Buddha suggested that it was essential to have a mindfulness with proper dharma to safeguard and protect the mind at all times in the following manners.
When having a consciousness, no matter what kinds of a mental phenomenon is arising, then having a mindfulness to consider it thoughtfully with systematic attention, yoniso manasikara, by having a mindfulness to determine whether the mind is wholesome or unwholesome. We should have mindfulness to protect the mind as follows. 1. When having a consciousness in receiving a stimulus, external object of consciousness, through the 6 sense bases, then having a mindfulness to contain the stimulus. Do not let the mind to be involved with it. 2. Even when eating food, also must have a mindfulness to control on the diet consumption, do not eat too much. 3. In case of encountering with an unwholesomeness within the mind, then, having a mindfulness to abandon it. 4. In case of encountering with an unwholesomeness within the mind, then having a mindfulness to abstain from desire and lust. 5. In case of encountering with a strong emotional unwholesomeness which is difficult to abandon it right away, then having a mindfulness to alleviate it, and then abandon it later. 6. Finally, performing the Buddhist practice in accord to the Buddha's teachings in order to develop insight wisdom for the cessation of all defilements, then having a mindfulness in conjunction with this wisdom to abandon any arising problem at the origin, and then liberating the mind.
The Buddhist practice is a learning experience. By having Yoniso Manasikara, we can apply a mindfulness to handle an arising problem in several ways, and finally by performing an insight observation, we will gain insight wisdom to eliminate the problem at the origin. During performing the Buddhist practice there will be various unwholesome thoughts disturbing the mind, and it is a necessity to have a mindfulness at all times in order to handle of all kinds of arising troubling phenomena and thoughts in accord to the Buddha's teachings during the Buddhist practice as follows.
When starting a practice, and if we let the mind randomly roll on in exploration, mostly the mind will be disturbed by the 16 kinds of unwholesome thoughts, mental defilements, including greed, ill will, anger, grudge, detraction, domineering, envy, meanness, deceit, hypocrisy, obstinacy, competing contention, conceit, contempt, vanity, and negligence. Therefore, we should learn on how to abandon all of these unwholesome thoughts with appropriated wholesome ways. Typically, in order to abandon all of those unwholesome thoughts, and keeping the mind in concentration, we must perform a yoniso manasikara, by having a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma in accord to the Buddha's words such as the goodness of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the noble Buddhist monks as refuge. Then the mind will become cheerful, raptured, in tranquility, relaxed, and steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. The Buddha's teachings are considered as guidelines explaining on how to abandon any unwholesome thought, of which it can be compared like opening a closed vessel, and lightening up a darkened mind for an enlightenment.
As realizing the benefit and useful of the mindfulness, however this mindfulness will arise and fade away like any phenomenon in nature, therefore we have to learn on how to reinitialize this mindfulness at all times. This mindfulness development is called the continuation of mindfulness repeatability. The Venerable Mahakaccana explained the continuation of mindfulness repeatability in the Buddhist practice as follows.
The continuation of mindfulness repeatability can be performed in 6 alternative ways as follows. 1. By constantly having a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma, determining, on the goodness of Buddha such as the goodness of his wisdom, his purity, and his compassion, then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. This kind of technique later is called a recollection of the Buddha. 2. By constantly having a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma, determining, on the goodness of Dharma such as the Dharma is well proclaimed, the Dharma is to be seen by an individual, the Dharma is timeless, the Dharma is inviting for inspection, the Dharma is leading onward, and the Dharma is directly experience-able, then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. This kind of technique later is called a recollection of the Dharma. 3. By constantly having a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma, determining, on the goodness of the community of noble disciples such as this is a community of good conduct, of upright conduct, of right conduct, of proper conduct, worth of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offers, worthy of salutation, and virtue for the world, then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. This kind of technique later is called a recollection of the order. 4. By constantly having a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma, determining, on the goodness of moralities, then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. 5. By constantly having a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma, determining, on the goodness of charities are the good things that we have done in the past, then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. 6. By constantly having a mindfulness with careful attention on Dharma, determining, on the quality to be an angel such as kindness and compassion, then the mind will abandon the unwholesomeness, and then the mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. This kind of technique later is called compassion meditation.